Hi, welcome everyone to our Truth Talks event hosted by the NYSIT Committee. My name is Tamika Tolliver, and I'm the UFT Teacher Center Instructional Coach, the co-chair of the UFT Pride Committee, and a member of the NYSIT Social Justice Committee from the subgroup LGBTQIA. Last but not least, I'm a proud African American lesbian, and I'm very grateful to be a part of this event. We're going to start with our land acknowledgement. We begin by acknowledging that we meet on the traditional land served by the first people. We honor America's indigenous people, their history, their culture, and their stewardship of the land since the time immemorial. We learn from all elders, past, present, and emerging. We are called to uncover and share the truths of tribal histories and contributions that have been silenced or suppressed in the telling of America. As we reflect on this truth, we also recognize that the story of this nation is deeply tied to struggle and survival. Alongside Native nations, the shaping of America has also been marked by the experiences of those brought here against their will and those who arrived seeking refuge or opportunity. Both forced and willing immigrants face systems of exclusion, violence, and exploitation, yet through resilience and contribution, they've helped weave the fabric of this nation. We lift the stories not to conflate them, but to see them as threads in the shared tapestry of resilience, threads woven alongside the enduring presence and sovereignty of Native nations. We invite you to think about the spaces you inhabit, the struggles and contributions of those who came before, and your role in honoring and carrying forward a more just and truthful story of America. So, this month is not just about celebration, it's about visibility, remembrance, and education. It's a moment to reflect on the many struggles and victories that have shaped the LGBTQ rights, both past and present. From the early pioneers of the movement who risked everything to live authentically, to those continuing to fight for justice and equality today. LGBTQ plus History Month reminds us that progress is never inevitable. It is built through courage, resistance, and solidarity. As we engage with these stories, it's important to remember that LGBTQ plus history is not separate from the broader human story. It is deeply interwoven into the fabric of our shared history. So right now, I would like to introduce the Secretary and Treasurer and Chair of the Civil Rights and Human Rights Committee and LGBTQ plus Committee, Philippe Abraham.
Thanks, Tamika. LGBTQ plus History Month matters for a million reasons, not the least of which is because when we recount stories of the past or write history books about our country with honesty, it must include everyone. For too long, the lives and contributions of LGBTQ plus people have been ignored, erased, or pushed aside. This month gives us a chance to correct the record and do the right and fair thing. LGBTQ plus History Month matters because visibility saves lives. When people can see others like themselves in history, they start to believe they belong, that they have a place today and hope for tomorrow. That's especially important now when trans rights are under attack and hate toward LGBTQ plus communities is rising. Seeing yourself represented isn't just nice, it can be life-changing. The stories of the LGBTQ plus community and the labor movement are connected. Both have always fought for fairness, respect, and equality. Both have challenged systems that try to deny people their full worth because of who they are. From the early 1900s on, queer people worked in factories, fields, offices, and schools, often joining unions and organizing for better treatment, even while facing extra discrimination. Many didn't just take part in those struggles, they helped lead them. Over time, unions became some of the strongest supporters of LGBTQ plus rights, fighting for fair policies, health benefits for partners, trans inclusive care, and safer workplaces. Groups like Pride at Work, one of the constituency groups of the AFL-CIO, still carry that work forward today. And finally, LGBTQ plus History Month matters because remembering is a way of honoring. It is our way of saying to those who came before us, those who lived in fear, who loved in secret, who opened the doors for us, we see you, we thank you, and we will carry your legacy forward. Thank you all for being here. And now, back to you, Tamika.
Thank you, Philippe. We are excited to introduce our guest speaker today. Eric Marcus is the founder and host of the podcast, Making Gay History. He is also the author of dozens of books, including the two editions of Making Gay History, the original 1992 edition, which is entitled Making History, and Why Suicide and Breaking the Surface, the #1 New York Times bestselling autobiography of the Olympic diving champion Greg Louganis. Eric is also the co-producer of Those Who Were There, a podcast drawn from the Fortunoff video archive from the Holocaust testimonies. He is the founder and chair of Emeritus of the Stonewall 50 Consortium and is the founding board member of the American LGBTQ Plus Museum. Amazing, Eric. We are so happy to have you today.
I'm so glad to be with you. And Tamika, do you want to guess why the original edition of the book was called Making History and not Making Gay History?
I would love to know.
1992 is when the first book was published, the original edition. And the publisher was nervous, as was I, about having a book with the word gay in the title. We were concerned about the ability of the sales force to sell a book. This is HarperCollins, to sell a book with the word gay in the title, and that in bookstores, they would be reluctant to show the book face out if the word gay were in the title. So we used it in the subtitle. And then the second edition was published 10 years later, and the world had changed by 2002, and there was no question about changing the title to Making Gay History. But the world has changed much more since then. And today we would probably call it Making LGBTQ plus history. But we decided to leave the title the same and also to call the podcast, which is drawn from that archive of more than 100 interviews that I did 30 some odd years ago. We decided to call the podcast the same title as the book, Making Gay History.
Awesome.
So thank you for having me today. I'm really delighted. And what I'd like to do with you is to share some of just a handful of clips from the archive scattered across the history of the movement, and then chat about some of the people I had the privilege of meeting beginning in 1989 when I was 30 years old. And now I'm almost as old and sometimes older than some of the people I interviewed who I thought were very old people, but I am one now. So may I share my screen?
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. And here we are. Now, the first person I would like to introduce you to is Edith Ide. Edith Ide sang in the lesbian clubs in the 1950s and 60s because she didn't like the entertainment that was popular in those clubs in LA at the time. The straight owners of the lesbian bars in Los Angeles would let straight guys come in the evenings, stand at the bar and watch the girls dance, as Edith explained to me. And the drag queens who played to the straight men in the audience would make derogatory jokes about lesbians. Edith hated that. So she decided to write her own music and her own lyrics to popular songs. She wrote parodies and also wrote some of her own lyrics and sang in the clubs. But that wasn't why I went to interview her in the first place. And you can find, we did a whole episode of Edith Ide's music called Edith Ide's Gay Gals Mixtape. She called herself a gay gal. That's how she identified. But the reason I went to interview her was because I had read about a secretary in Hollywood who worked at RKO Radio Pictures, who published the first magazine for lesbians on her office typewriter in 1947. Edith called her magazine Vice Versa, subtitled America's Gayest Magazine, used the word gay at a time when it was really only an in-word. Nobody knew that it referred to homosexual people. Edith typed the magazine through twice on her office typewriter using 5 sheets of carbon paper each time. That's how she came up with 10 copies of every edition. She published 9 editions. And she did this because her boss said to her, I want you to look busy, but I don't want you to type or knit. So, what would you do if you were a 20-something-year-old lesbian in 1947 when there was no such thing as a gay organization or a lesbian organization of any kind? Edith published a magazine, and she decided that she would also write a column called the Whatchama column, in which she talked about her hopes and dreams for the future. That's what I'm going to share with you now. This is just a short clip, and all the clips I'm sharing with you today are drawn from longer episodes of the Making Gay History podcast, which you can access on whatever podcast player you have or at makinggayhistory.org, where we have resources for each of our episodes and archival photos as well. So here's Edith Ide from her front porch in Burbank, California in 1989, talking about her Whatchama column.
It was just some writing that I wanted to do to get it off my chest, and I was a very lonely person, and I could sort of fantasize this way by writing the magazine, you see. And then, I'd write at the end the Whatchama column, and that was just ideas that happened off the top of my head that I would write about and say, wouldn't it be wonderful if, not fantasize exactly, but imagine about how things might be in the future with us.
What were some of the things you imagined?
Well, I imagined that perhaps we would have a lot of magazines and that perhaps even movies might be made about us. I would hope that someday we would not be looked down on with so much disdain.
Well, I think this may be where this is the column, this is the article, Here to Stay. September 1947, Volume 1, Number 4. Whether the unsympathetic majority approves or not, it looks as though the third sex is here to stay. With the advancement of psychiatry and related subjects, the world is becoming more and more aware that there are those in our midst who feel no attraction for the opposite sex. Homosexuality is becoming less and less a taboo subject, and although still considered by the general public as contemptible or treated with derision, I venture to predict that there will be a time in the future when gay folk will be accepted as part of regular society. That's pretty bold stuff.
Well, I guess it is. I never thought of it as being bold at the time. I was just, as I say, I was just sort of fantasizing. But it all has come to pass.
Isn't that incredible?
It's so incredible. I'm listening and imagining what would she say if she was here today? I mean, outside of the negative, we've come a long way. And a lot of her fantasies have come into fruition. So it is amazing. So just listening to this, I'm curious, what originally drew you to journalism and storytelling as a way to advocate for change?
Well, I wish I could take credit for having chosen to do this book. I didn't. My first book was called The Male Couple's Guide to Living Together. What gay men should know about finding a man, making a home, building a life, something. I'm forgetting what the subtitle is. It was published in 1988. And I actually had wanted to work in TV journalism and went to work I got a job at Good Morning America, and then went to work at CBS News. And it was when I was at CBS News that I got a call from an editor friend asking if I would consider writing an oral history of what was then called the gay and lesbian civil rights movement. So I'm not, most of the stuff I've done in life has it's come to me as a challenge. So the podcast also was not my idea. It was the idea of my neighbor, Sarah Birmingham. I was asked to do a small education project providing clips from my archive for an organization called History Unerased. And it was Sarah, who was an experienced audio journalist, a radio journalist. And when I asked her to cut some tape, as she cut 3-hour interviews down to 16 minutes with a goal of 6 minutes, she said, "This sounds like a podcast."
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, Tamika, to say that I can't take credit.
Listen to me. Don't be sorry. This is amazing work. And however it came to you, we are grateful for it.
and once I started doing the work, I discovered that, especially when I was doing publicity for my books, people would ask me questions as if I were the world's expert on gay people and gay subjects. And I would explain, based on having interviewed 89 people for the original edition of the book and then another 20 or so for the second. I'd say, well, I can speak for the people I interviewed, but I eventually gave that up and I just said, okay, you want me to speak for all people? And it was at a time when this was before there were celebrities who were out, before there were high profile anybody. So I often corrected the people who interviewed me that I didn't represent everybody and that I was not an advocate. I didn't set out to change the world, but in doing these interviews, I was transformed. And I felt an enormous responsibility to share these stories. And some of them were incredibly inspirational and sometimes very heartbreaking, especially the older people I interviewed who were often very alone. And in fact, when Edith had to go into a nursing home in her early 90s, she decided she had to go back in the closet because she was afraid that if the people who worked at the nursing home knew that she was a lesbian, that she wouldn't get proper care.
Wow.
Yeah. So that actually, it's a good lead into my second clip that I'd like to share with you. Wendell Sayers was 86 when I interviewed him. He lived in Denver, Colorado. He asked that I not use his real name in the book, which I didn't. Wendell Sayers is in fact his real name. We went for lunch first at a diner around the corner from where he lived, and he asked if we could sit in a far corner so that nobody would overhear us because he was afraid that his family in Western Kansas might find out that he was homosexual and be embarrassed by him. So Wendell went to a convention of an organization called the Mattachine Society in 1959. It was an organization founded by 5 gay men in Los Angeles in 1950. We might assign the term gay rights group to what they founded in 1950, but it was more of an opportunity for people to gather together and talk about the issues they faced in life at the time, which it was very challenging for people who were LGBTQ. They had to remain hidden. So Wendell in 1959 went to the Denver convention of the Mattachine Society. By 59, there were small chapters in cities around the country. But Wendell took an enormous risk in going because he was African American and an attorney. And he later worked for the state attorney general of Colorado, the first African American attorney to do so. If he was spotted at the convention, if anybody figured out who he was and he was reported, he would have lost his job and probably been disbarred. But he wanted to find his people and found he wasn't always welcome. And he thought it was part because of his skin color and part because he was an attorney and gay people were afraid of the law. The clip I'm going to share with you, though, is of a story Wendell told me about being sent to the Mayo Clinic in 1919. He was 16 years old, and his father, who thought Wendell might be a homosexual, sent Wendell and his mother on a road trip from Western Kansas to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. They took a tent because they couldn't stay at hotels because of segregation, and they bought bologna and crackers at gas stations because no restaurants would serve them. So the clip that I'm going to share with you is from Wendell talking about the trip home. And he'd been diagnosed as a homosexual, was there for 3 days of tests. They told him that they should call the police and have him incarcerated. But since he was their patient, they were not going to call the police. He realized later they probably were just trying to scare him, which they did. But he was most scared of how his father would react when he got home. So this is Wendell Sayers, Denver, Colorado, 1989. And he was 86 years old at the time I interviewed him.
So we went back home and reported to Dad. I might say this, that I was an adopted child. Mm-hmm. And I often used to wonder as a kid, what will he do when he finds it out? See, will he put me out or kick me out, or will he accept me? My dad was very understanding. I say understanding, I don't think he actually understood, but he was willing to accept, I should say. Mm-hmm. So he finally told me, he says, well, since they don't know what to do about it, find you a friend that you can trust and bring them home. said, I don't want you playing around on the streets or out on the country roads because you never know who's going to step up behind you or step up on you. Bring them home. What you do in your room is your business because they didn't want me out on the street.
When I left Wendell's house, he had a question for me. He said, do you think it's too late for me to meet somebody? He said, not for sex. He said, too late for that. He said, but for companionship. And I lied because I knew from what he told me that the odds of him meeting anyone was zero. He was out to two people at his church, two gay men who died of AIDS. So he wasn't out to anybody. So, but I lied and I said, it's never too late. But as far as I know, he never met anyone and spent the rest of his life alone.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. I mean, even that alone, just it's impactful just to even hear how his dad responded, right? That he had that support, but still felt the need to keep the secret.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so I was thinking about like you spent decades documenting these LGBTQ plus voices. What
Yeah.
have you learned about how our community stories have evolved over time? Because I'm listening to this story and I'm thinking about what you're saying, but you know, what have you learned about how the stories have changed over time?
So different because our history is compressed. I think that, I mean, we speak in terms of generations, in terms of the larger population, but for us, the changes have been so rapid that it's all very compressed. So Wendell, who was still alive in 1989, had such a different experience growing up than someone like me. And the older gay folks I interviewed often talked about feeling like dinosaurs, that the world had moved so quickly that they couldn't adjust. And I'll just give you an example of, it'll come up a little later, but that the with every change, let me rephrase this. Each generation, which really was 5 or 10 years for LGBTQ people, the younger people who came on the scene assumed that the world was always the way they found it. And they were very impatient about the older people and felt that they were accommodationists. They didn't understand what the world was like. But the younger people didn't appreciate the challenges that the earlier generations experienced. So when I was doing my research, I read a book by John D'Amelio about it was the one book at the time that I read on the history of the gay rights movement because there wasn't a lot out there. The other book was written by Jonathan Ned Katz, and he wrote about what was called the homophile movement, the movement before Stonewall, through the lens of a younger person, and was very critical of the older activists being accommodationists, that they were fearful and they didn't have courage. And in interviewing some of the older folks, they talked about feeling really hurt that what they did in the times in which they lived was very courageous. And I came to see their experiences as very courageous, just going as Wendell did to the convention in 1959. He risked far more than I ever did when I went to the Gay Alliance meeting at Vassar College in 1976 as a freshman. So the biggest lesson I've learned is to not look at the older generations through our contemporary lens, to know and understand the times in which they lived, and then to look at what they did in that context. Why did they require women to wear skirts to their conventions? Why were the early protests in front of the White House conducted by men who wore suits and ties and women who wore skirts and heels? We might look on that as absolutely ridiculous, but they did it then because most people had never seen a homosexual. And they were trying to create a brand so that they would fit in to a society that was trying to destroy them. So it's a very long answer to your short
No,
question.
thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah. But it's a very good question. Um, yeah. And I struggled with that in not looking at these stories through my own lens of someone who grew up in the 1970s. So speaking of the 70s, I want to take you to 1969.
During the civil rights.
Oops, hang on a second. I just jumped ahead. I want to take you actually to the early 60s and Bayard Rustin. When I've spoken at financial services companies and also in schools, and I ask, how many of you have ever heard of Bayard Rustin? Usually maybe a hand goes up, but most often no one knows who he is. Because we know that Bayard Rustin was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s principal mentor and also the chief architect of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. But because he was out and gay, he was in the background, and he's not taught as part of the Black civil rights curriculum. So often when I'm asked, who is someone you wished you'd been able to interview, who you hadn't had the chance to interview, Bayard Rustin was one of those people. He died in 1987, and I didn't start work until 1988. So long story short, we were in search of an audio recording where Bayard Rustin talked about his relationship with Dr. King in light of his sexuality, and the impact of his sexuality on the movement. And again, very long story short, because it's a great story, but I don't have time. We found a tape of Bayard Rustin giving an interview to Peg Byron at the Washington Blade that was in a suitcase under the bed of Walter Nagel, Bayard Rustin's surviving partner. And it was tape that no one had heard before. And we had the privilege of sharing it for the first time. So here's a clip. This is a short clip. You'll hear me setting it up first. And then you'll hear Bayard Rustin talking about the FBI and what happened with him and Dr. King and the movement. So here, you'll hear me first. During the Civil Rights Movement, Dr. King and his associates were being monitored by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, wanted to disrupt King's efforts however he could. The FBI director saw Bayard as an easy target.
J. Edgar Hoover began to circulate all kinds of stories about Martin Luther King. One of which was that he was a friend of mine, hinting that somehow or other there might be some homosexual relationship going on between us. This frightened a number of the people in Martin Luther King's movement. At a given point, there was so much pressure on Dr. King about my being gay, and particularly because I would not deny it, that he set up a committee to explore whether it would be dangerous for me to continue working with him. And naturally, I took the position that if people feel that I am a danger to so important a movement, I would leave.
And he left. But then he came back, and that's when he planned the March on Washington. So how can you teach the Black Civil Rights Movement and Dr. King and the March on Washington without Bayard Rustin?
That's amazing just to even hear that. And you did take my question because that's exactly what I was going to ask. If there would be one person you could interview, so what would you ask him? Is there a burning question if you had that opportunity to speak to him, or is there a situation that you would?
I do, Tamika. I do have a question because
Tell me.
I didn't get to interview Bayard. I would say, what gave you the courage to do this? Were you out of your mind? Being an out gay man in 1963. And what kept you going? Because he could have walked away when he left the movement. He didn't have to come back. And then planning a march on the March on Washington, the most important march on the most important march in the history of the country. And then also, what did it feel like not to get credit? He didn't live to get the Medal of Freedom, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. It was Walter Nagel, his surviving partner, who got to receive it on his behalf from President Obama. There's so many questions I wish I could ask of him. Such an important figure, but this is a key part of his story. And I'll share a screen with you a little later about the lessons we've created in partnership with the National Education Association. And the one that is of most interest to teachers we're finding is the Bayard Rustin story, because it fits so seamlessly into the American history curriculum. One question, though, is what happens in states where you can't say gay?
Then that really excludes a whole lot.
Yeah, so I mean, there may be other ways of, the situation's insane.
Right. Thank you, though. I appreciate that.
Yeah. May I jump ahead?
Sure.
So when I interviewed Sylvia Rivera, who's a trans icon of the movement, who's most often associated with the Stonewall Uprising and then an organization called STAR, the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. When I interviewed Sylvia, I had never met someone who self-identified as a drag queen. I come from what I call the Iowa of New York City, from far eastern Queens, and I led a very sheltered life. And even though I was 30 and had gone to Vassar College and Columbia University and studied abroad, I'd never met anyone like Sylvia. So I was very nervous when I rang the buzzer in the lobby of her tenement building in a small river town north of New York City, and was buzzed into the building. And then standing at the top of the stairs was Sylvia Rivera, dressed in what she called scare drag. I came to learn was called scare drag, partial long hair, full makeup, in a bear with a bear light bulb above her, and she looked scary and dressed in the kind of outfit that my sister might have worn to a disco in the 1970s. And but as she explained to me later, she said, you have your hair out, you have makeup on, but you don't have the tits on, is exactly what she said to me. But I thought, oh my God, how am I going to do this interview? But what I didn't realize was that I was also in my own drag. I was wearing, and forgive me, green corduroys, a blue button-down shirt, penny loafers, and an orange puffy jacket. And it was a preppy drag that I adopted when I was at Vassar College. It was the high school I went to was more like Saturday Night Fever, bell bottoms, Kiana knit shirts, and that sort of thing. So anyway, Sylvia invited me into her apartment. She introduced me to her boyfriend Frank and her friend Rennie, who was as butch as Rennie was a lesbian, as butch as Sylvia was femme. And it was cozy in the kitchen and warm, and Sylvia was making a pot of chili on the stove. And as the publisher allowed me to say in the book, there was a bottle of vodka or gin, I can't remember, well on its way to being emptied on the table. They wouldn't let me say that Sylvia was blasted, which she drank a lot through the interview. And in telling her very painful life story, I can understand why she was drinking. And also at the time, Sylvia said, call me Ray, call me Sylvia, whatever you want. Things were less structured around trans issues and gender in 1989 when I interviewed Sylvia. So this is a clip of Sylvia talking about the Stonewall Uprising, the first night. And this picture of Sylvia is from 1970. And Sylvia was all of 20 years old in 1970. So Sylvia was actually one of the older street kids. What I should say is the street kids who led the initial challenge to the police on June 28th, 1969 at the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village. They were young, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids, mostly gender nonconforming, we would call them today. And they had been thrown out of their homes and were living on the street. The complication with Sylvia's telling of this story about the first night of the Stonewall Inn, and I'll play this for you, is that she wasn't there. Marsha B. Johnson, her friend, said that she was up at the park at Bryant Park having cocktails. So I'll tell you a little bit about my thinking about this clip after I play the clip, but I'll play the clip for you.
To be there, it's just like, oh, it was so beautiful. I just like, it's like.
Was it exciting?
Oh, it was so exciting. It was like, ow, we're doing it. We're doing it. We're fucking their nerves. The cops were, they just panicked. Inspector Pine really panicked. Mm-hmm. He really did. Mm-hmm. Plus, he had no backup. Mm-hmm. He knew. He did not expect any of the retaliation that the gay community gave him at that point.
Do you think all this was in part because people were so angry for so long?
People were very angry for so long. I mean, how long can you live in a closet?
Most of the people I spoke with talked about anger and how it motivated them. The friend was beaten up, they were thrown out of a job, a friend was killed, and they wanted to make things better for the next generation. And people also talked about love and the search for love. Many people joined organizations looking for boyfriends and girlfriends, since we LGBTQ people are like everybody else. But Sylvia taught me an important lesson about oral history and memory, because memory is what we remember, what we think we remember, and how we might like to remember ourselves in it. And Sylvia recognized that Stonewall was a very important event. And I think she came to believe that she'd actually been there. But I also know that she lobbied people to tell them that, to ask them if they would say she was there. I don't think it takes away from Sylvia's work in the aftermath as a trans rights activist. And the story she tells about the first night is exactly the same story other people told me who were there. And I think if everybody who said they were at Stonewall had been at Stonewall, they would have filled Yankee Stadium. Because, you know, everyone, I often joke that my mother threw the first cocktail glass, and you can't tell me that she wasn't there that night.
So this is perfect for my question because just thinking about what you said, how do you see storytelling as a tool for preserving LGBTQ plus history and advancing equality?
That's such a good point. I love I love storytelling as history. I remember in junior high school, Mr. Fetterbush in seventh grade read from the social studies textbook, dates, places, names, and the only thing I remember from all of seventh grade was when he mentioned that he'd been in the Battle of the Bulge during World War II. He had been. He wouldn't answer any questions about it. And I found history very boring. But I fell in love with history when I did this book because I love hearing people's stories. Do the facts always line up? Nah. Um, can I always confirm everything that I hear? No. But often the stories in general are correct. Or they are as people remembered them. And it brings history to life in a way that sort of dry recitation, which is often what you get in textbooks, doesn't. And I find especially the audio really engages young people. It actually engages everybody. I love watching when I've taught classes in high schools, especially, and I play an audio clip. I love watching people's faces because sometimes people will close their eyes as they're listening in a very concentrated way, or they'll settle down, if they've been a little bit fidgety. So audio has such power, the power of the human voice to affect us. And when you hear the story of someone like Sylvia Rivera talking about being living on the street from age 11, and hearing her describe what it's like to be arrested and how she wasn't accepted by the movement at the time, and there are good reasons why she wasn't accepted, and why people feared her. It's one thing to read it, it's another thing to hear it. And I think telling our stories is essential. And I was fortunate to meet so many of these people whose stories either hadn't been recorded or had maybe had been written down but never recorded for audio. So I think it's key. I think it's key.
I agree 100%. Thank you.
Yeah. I think we have time for one or two more clips.
Yes.
Okay. So speaking of dinosaurs, Barbara Giddings and Kayla Husen, that's Kay on the left, Barbara on the right, they were instrumental in the movement in the 1960s, and they planned the first protests in front of the White House and other places, and were later responsible for helping to get homosexuality removed from the list of mental illnesses in 1973. So they were key in the homophile movement, and then they missed the Stonewall Uprising. They were away. They came back in October of '69, went to a meeting of the new Gay Liberation Front organization, which was run mostly by young people, and they were accused of being dinosaurs. You're old. You're in your 30s. What are you doing here? And they had a real sense of humor. They approached activism with joy. They had a great time changing the world. And Kay went out and bought a couple of dinosaurs, and they carried those little stuffed dinosaurs with them to all the meetings they went to that year, just to poke at the young people saying the dinosaurs still walk the earth. So the clip I'm going to share with you from Barbara and Kay is from 1971, the American Library Association convention. Books were instrumental for Barbara in finding herself as a lesbian. She read a book called The Well of Loneliness in the 1950s. It's a lesbian love story. It was published in 1928. And so she got very involved in the American Library Association. And for the 1971 convention, they produced a single sheet of paper with all the positive gay books that had been published up to that point. They rented a booth on the convention floor. They taped bibliographies to columns and elevators all over the convention. They had stacks of them at their table in their booth. Those booths that have curtains and they had decorations. Nobody paid attention. So they decided we got to find a way to get some attention at our booth on the convention floor, and this is what they did.
Well, we decided to bypass books and show gay love live. So we called it Hug a Homosexual. And we stripped it down to the bare gray curtains, and we had a sign up, men only at one end and women only at the other. And we stationed ourselves, all four of us, under the signs to give free, mind you, free same-sex kisses and hugs. Well, let me tell you, the aisles were jammed, but nobody came into the booth.
And Life magazine was there.
Life magazine photographer was there. Two Dallas television stations had sent camera crews.
Right, but
and
the
I think
lights were
people
going
were
all
rather
around.
intimidated. Yes, the lights were on, and all these people jammed in the aisles, craning their necks to see the action, but nobody wanted to take part. So we did the action. We kissed and embraced each other for 2 hours. We handed out copies of the bibliography. We called out encouragement. We kissed and hugged each other some more. Alma Routzon was an absolute peach. She and I were on the female end, and a couple of the men were on the other, and we did all this ourselves. That really put us on the map.
So there we were on the 6 o'clock news, and the library
And
people
again-
were livid. They said, we
No.
have all these famous authors here, and all they cover is this kissing booth.
They put us on the 6 o'clock news. They put us again on the 11 o'clock news, and again the next morning. This was news.
It's made the local news.
Yes.
Denver?
Dallas. It was wonderful. And it really, our spirits soared because really the booth also had a message that was useful in any arena. And that is that gay people are not willing anymore to be subject to a special double standard. If we should have the same right to express our affection publicly as heterosexuals have. No more, but no less.
Absolutely. Yeah. They were just the best. I stayed friends with them until the end of their lives. I have one more clip to share with you.
Awesome.
And it's an example of citizen activists. Because so often in our movement, it's taken individuals who stood up and fought back. And this is a story of Deborah Johnson and Zandra Rolón Amato, who went to a dinner in 1983. And by that point, cities and municipalities across, and counties, I should say, across the country had passed new laws protecting gay and lesbian people from discrimination in employment and accommodations. So when they went to a romantic restaurant for dinner, they had every reason to expect that they would be served. And here's what happened.
At the time, I was working on Saturdays. So this was the first weekend that we were going to have a complete weekend together since we had gotten together. It was also the year right before Martin Luther King's birthday was made into a holiday. And a friend of mine told me about this restaurant that was really nice, and the restaurant had these 6 booths on one side that were real romantic. And we got there, and the waiter kind of questioned us about, are you sure you want the booths? And we told him yes. And it's the type of booths where you have to move the table out so that you can get in, like a horseshoe. And in the middle of the horseshoe was like a fountain, and there was a guy with a violinist who came around, and the booth right in front of the table was a little white sheer curtain that closed in the candlelight, and it was just romantic.
Did it occur to you that this might be a problem?
Not at all. I mean, to me, discrimination never enters my mind first. Ever. So they showed us to our table, we sit down, and we're taking our jackets off, and this tall, humongous guy comes by and yanked the table away and told us, so sorry, but you can't sit here. It's against the law
and,
to serve two men or 2 women in these booths. And we asked to see the manager. And
we weren't going to move.
The guy that turned out to be the real maitre d' kept giving us the back of the bus type of thing, where you can sit over there and you can sit over here and you'll have free drinks and the whole thing, but you cannot sit here, you will not be served here. And kept insisting that it was against the law. It was against the law. And that really, it makes me crazy thinking about it. It made me more mad. So you got to remember, we were there about Martin Luther King's birthday, and then we were going to take it off the next day as this real show of solidarity and its importance in the whole bit. And if there's anything the King had taught us, it was that we could sit anywhere in the restaurant we wanted to sit.
So what do you think, Tamika? What do you think they did?
I can't even imagine. I'm sure they did exactly what they needed to do. They sat there, they stayed there, they enjoyed their food, and they probably went back and told their friends.
No, they sued. And they hired Gloria Allred, who was not a famous attorney at that point, who later became famous for representing women in discrimination cases in particular, and they won. But the owner of the Papa Shoe restaurant wasn't going to serve same-sex couples, so he held a press conference, had the romantic booths hauled to the curb and taken away, and said, "On this day, romantic dining dies." So in a way
Wow.
similar to what happened in the South when communities were required by law to integrate their swimming pools, but close them instead, he wasn't going to serve same-sex couples. But what was really important about this case was that it was one of the first times that one of these new laws was challenged in court and it was upheld. So it was key.
That is
Um,
key.
yeah, and so often it took individuals doing this sort of thing. I just want to show you one more thing before I turn this back to you, as I know we're
Sure.
virtually out of time. I'm going to skip that. Um, we have worked with the National Education Association with a group of 14 NEA teachers to create lessons anchored by our Making Gay History podcast episodes. And you can find those on our website at makinggayhistory.org. These are just 3 examples. And for many of the pieces many of the lessons that we created with the NEA teachers, the teachers who created the lessons were interviewed by us, by our education lead, Mary Hendra, and you can see the little video box so you can hear about the teacher's experience of creating the lesson. So the lessons include lesson plans, handouts, slides, all the things that you need to integrate these lessons into your courses. It's not just for LGBTQ History Month. So for example, the Dr. Hooker, you can see psychology, um, uh, social studies, US history. So we give examples of where you can teach the lessons to integrate it seamlessly into the curriculum. So, and we also now have an educator newsletter, which you can sign up for on our website. And we're just about to launch, it's probably premature to say, but we're just about to launch a second round of lessons that we're going to create with NEA teachers. And we will be asking NEA teachers to apply to be a part of the fellowship to help create these lessons.
That is amazing work. That's exactly what I was going to ask. How do we move forward with this work outside of the podcast? So this is an amazing resource.
Yeah,
So my final question is,
yeah.
what do you hope listeners feel or think differently after hearing Making Gay History?
Um, we often think that it takes people who are superhuman or super special to make a difference in the world. And in fact, we each can make a difference in the world, as many of the people I interviewed did in their own ways, whether small or large. Large, Bayard Rustin creating the architect of the March on Washington, Wendell Sayers, who went to a convention and risked his job. Um, Teachers can teach these materials. For me, it is recording these stories, sharing these stories, finding ways to get them out in the world. Um, Simplest thing you can do is tell people about the Making Gay History podcast, where you can listen to more than 150 episodes about people and with people who are so inspiring. They inspire me every day and keep me from wanting to crawl under my desk, despite where the world is at this moment. These are people who fought for their rights in times that were way more difficult than ours, when there was nobody who was out publicly. We have so many more resources now than we did in the past. We also have places like the NEA that are so supportive, and the state chapters as well. I'm here talking with you today.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's how we do it. We share one person to the next through stories.
And just listening, since the first time we've met, I've been listening every day. I listen to 1 or 2, and it is inspiring. It's uplifting, especially in these trying times, to know that people have come way farther, right? And we made it to this point, and we will continue to make progress. So
Yeah,
I
and
think
this
it's
isn't the
so
first time.
important.
Yeah, and it's not the first time that we've had a backlash. This is bad, but we are much better prepared now than we were in the past.
Yes, we are. Thank you so much for this enlightened discussion. We really appreciate you being here, and thank you again.
Thank you so much, Tamika.